Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back for what is our final session of the NSX Nordic Congress 2021. It seems to have flown by, certainly for me, and delighted to be closing off with a fantastic panel focused on building international big medtech, US market access, expansion and investment. So we've got a great panel lineup and a lot of topics to dig into today. Please do keep your questions coming in through the chat function, which you'll see at the bottom right of your screen. You can ask any questions to any of our panel as we go on and throughout, and we'll look to build them into the discussion during and at the end. So please do keep those coming in. Delighted to be handing over to our moderator for today's discussion, John Rudy with Mint. So John, the stage is yours.
Thanks very much, Josh. Appreciate it. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. And thanks to all four of our panelists for being here today and taking the time. Really appreciate it. And as Josh said, please feel free to submit questions. I'll see them on my chat screen over here. To the extent they make sense, I can kind of interject them into the conversation. And if some of them make more sense to address a little bit later in the session, we can do that as well. But I'll be monitoring that as we go. Just a quick background on myself. I'm a partner at Mintz Levin in Boston, sitting here in Boston, skyline in the background, and a capital market securities partner, primarily focused on life science, which writ large, including med tech and device and diagnostic, and obviously lots of biotech. Represent both companies, issuers, and investment banks on the company side through their life cycle, but obviously focused heavily on companies that are seeking to go public, whether by IPO, SPAC, reverse merger, whatever the mechanism, and then representing those companies through their life as a public company to wherever they go, whether that's an M&A exit or something else. And on the bank side, represent the investment banks, both the boutique life science banks and the bulge bracket and others in the whole kind of medley of mostly equity products. And so obviously it's been a crazy 18 months, very, very active for everybody, and sort of unlike any other 18-month period that something that I've worked through. And we can talk about all of that and more over the course of the hour. I'd like to now just give each panelist a few minutes to introduce themselves, give you their background on themselves, and then maybe talk a little bit about the perspective they bring to this panel and to MedTech. So I'll start with Jonathan, if that works with him.
Works for me. John, thank you. And wonderful to be here. I think these LSX meetings live were wonderful, and virtually they turned out to be extremely good as well, although I think I probably speak for everybody when I say we are all just incredibly eager to see someone in 3 dimensions rather than 2. So again, my name is Jonathan Girdler. I really have 2 hats in this setting. I am the managing partner and CEO of Back Bay Life Science Advisors, which is an integrated strategy consulting and investment banking firm based in Boston, but with a global reach. I'm very proud to say that we've had an extremely strong Nordic presence really since inception. I've been working in and around the Nordics for 15 years and have many, many dear friends and longstanding colleagues throughout the region, both in the medtech, diagnostics, health tech, and biotech community. And one of them is actually Niels Erik Holm, who is one of my old friends with whom I worked really almost at the start of Back Bay 11.5 years ago. So nice to be here with Niels Erik. I also am a partner, one of 4 partners in a medtech, health tech growth capital fund in Boston called BioVentures MedTech Funds. It started out as BioVentures Investors about 22 years ago, but we're now solely focused on health tech and medtech. A very strong interest in investing in Europe and the Nordics, as well as in the United States, and really focused in this current fund, which closed at about 210 million in December and is targeting 300 million. Companies that are really removed from development or regulatory risk and moving really fully into commercialization with proximity to exit. So I'm hoping to bring the perspective of both my advisory work for many, many decades now to medtech companies for this conversation, but also the perspective of a US-based investor with motivations and friendships that render investing in the Nordics an appealing entity. By way of further background, just briefly, I was a vascular surgeon in academia for about 20 years. I spent about a decade as an associate professor at Harvard and one of the 4 operating surgeons at the time of the NGH. I have invented in the medtech space, sold companies of my origin in the medtech space, and have continued to start companies across health tech and the life sciences as well. So again, John, really a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for the introduction. And I think the U.S. investor perspective in particular is going to be super interesting, I think, given the mix we have here. And maybe I'll turn to Niels next, if that's okay, Niels.
Yes, fine. Initially in my career, a long time ago, I was an inventor of the insulin infusion sets, and later on the first disposable insulin pen, Novolet. So somehow I was guided into treatment of diabetes, helping diabetic patients, But then in the 90s, I started on autologous fiber glue for surgery use, and I was trying to get away from diabetes, but it didn't succeed because we then started to put platelets in the fiber glue and treated diabetic foot ulcers with good results. And in 2008, I founded the company Reaflix with Rasmus Lundqvist with the aim of making a treatment for diabetic foot ulcers. And it was based on drawing some blood from a patient and created a 3-layer patch consisting of fibrin, platelets, and white cells. And we placed that on the diabetic foot ulcers with good success. We started in 2008, and actually we had CE marked in 2011. And we had done a couple of trials, and then we actually called Jonathan Back Bay to say, what's the next step, And he advised us to do a large clinical trial, because that was needed to enter the US market, because the only advanced treatment that was, US is the only market where using this advanced treatment, more expensive treatment, advanced, because they had the Apligraf and Dermagraft product approved there. So he advised us to do a clinical trial in Europe, because it's very expensive and complicated to make it in the States. So we made a protocol for Europe, but was asking FDA input on this protocol. And to get a really hard input answer from FDA, we actually filed for an IDE, and to our surprise, we got it approved. And then we went to CMS and asked what they think about it, if it was a study that could result in reimbursement. And we actually get approved as a CED study without taking any US patient into the clinical trial. We ended the study in 2017 and got it published in The Lancet in 2018. And of course, we went back to CMS with a publication and said, now we like to have reimbursement. And we actually obtained a national coverage decision this year in April. And we're now waiting for transmittal to be sent out to the MAC so they can start paying for the treatment. And that's my background.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And Niels, you referenced the clinical trial, the large clinical trial. Was it entirely outside the US?
Yes. Yeah. It was Denmark, England, and Sweden.
Wow.
It was accepted both by FDA and CMS. But does it make sense, because the diabetic patient have the same diseases and the same treatment, so it makes perfect sense. So,
okay, interesting.
So it was a nice surprise.
That'll be a great discussion around biology-based treatments versus engineering-based treatments, actually.
Okay.
In terms of FDA and European versus US trials and reimbursement.
Interesting. It
was a great trial, Niels Erik.
Yes, very
sounds
nice.
like it.
Yes.
We'll definitely should come back to that point. I think it's really interesting. To keep going on the intros, Tim, if you're up to introduce yourself.
Absolutely, thank you. My name is Tim. I'm the managing partner at MedTech Bridge, which is a grant-funded project that was initiated to sort of shorten the distance between Danish MedTech innovation and the US market. So we consider ourselves, actually started as an initiative for Danish in medtech innovation, but now we have expanded also into Sweden and Finland. So we represent almost all of Scandinavia here, and we consider ourselves advisors. So we provide wise advice for a fast entry to the US. So we try and shorten the timeline, reduce risk, and ensure the realization of innovation in the US market. I've personally 25 years of experience in the medtech industry with product development from cradle to grave. So everything from technology maturing to launching and regulatory approvals, commercial aspects, and then yes, the perspective I bring to this discussion is the representation of 95 members in MedTechBridge, who all they come from all corners of the medtech space really, and some a little bit outside the medtech space, but they all have the common challenge, and that is getting to know the US market and know how to enter that.
And Tim, one thing I noticed just from looking at your background, MedTechBridge has a focus on Minnesota, is that right? And
well, Medical Alley is a partner in MedTechBridge. Yeah, we don't limit, so to speak, our outlook to US to Minnesota. No.
But how did that partnership come to pass? What's sort of the nature of it?
That was a part of the whole setup from the beginning. So basically, that was the connection from the people that initiated the project. So it was personal connections, and that's also I think an important learning for us at MedTechBridge is that it's all about who getting to connect with the right people, and that's how Medical Alley got to be a partner in MedTechBridge.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. And Steen, last but certainly not least, it'd be great to hear from you, and then in particular, congratulations on the great news for Radiobotics, and maybe you can share a little bit about that as well.
Sure. So hi everyone, my name is Stine Sorensen, and I'm the COO and the co-founder of Radiobotics. And at Radiobotics, we sort of built machine learning algorithms that detect diseases in plain 2D X-rays. So we are applied into the medical imaging space, and we have just got our FDA clearance last week. And that is obviously a great achievement. We have before that had our MDR certification, which is also quite a great achievement in terms of accessing the European market, being one of the first 5 imaging company getting that as well. So I think the regulatory aspect is extremely important, because one thing is building technology that works, but it's also actually to prove that you can live up to the highest standards when it comes for patient safety and accuracy in what you do. So yeah, and then another thing is the commercial side of it, which is also a great challenge, especially when you're trying to enter the US market. So my background is actually in I've been working with digital transformation for the last 10 years in various capacities, both at an agency, in the big pharmaceutical company in Denmark, and then also been working at my own startups for the past 7 years, doing a Silicon Valley exit 4 years ago, and obviously trying to leverage a little bit on that experience as well. And that is sort of the foundation of Radiobotics. And I'm happy to share much more about our US journey as well. So obviously my perspective would be a founder and a startup perspective of how to do this. And I can promise I don't have all the answers. I myself have more questions, but at least I'm happy to share what we have learned and some of the questions we are struggling with as well.
Thank you, Steve. That's fantastic. So my thought here is to maybe start the conversation. And we just have a bunch of really interesting operational and kind of regulatory-based points I think that were raised, and I definitely want to get to all those. My thought maybe is to start on the kind of financing side, and maybe think, given that we've got two kind of great entrepreneurs here and founders, if Niels and Steen, if you could maybe give us a little background on how you have financed your ventures, and what investor bases, investor communities you've gone to. Have you focused mostly on staying within Denmark or the broader Nordic set of countries? Has it been the venture community that you've approached? Has it been family offices, high net worth individuals? Has it been grants and state sponsored entities? And then how you've thought about the U.S. investor community, in particular the U.S. VC space, and similarly how you thought about public capital. I know I was talking earlier to Niels and Tim about the Swedish model for smaller IPOs and on Nasdaq Stockholm and the ability to get those done there as opposed to what they've seen in Denmark. And then of course, as we go a little bit, we can talk about, the U.S. public capital markets as well a little bit. But if Niels or Stine, one of you wants to kind of jump in terms of your background in terms of financing your companies.
Niels, do you want to start?
Yeah, we started with financing from local investors, investors and Vækstfonden, actually the state government, and then Novoseed. And later on, we have had private investors and family funds, and we have not been looking for US investors at all, because we were of the impression they wouldn't invest in European companies unless we have a market presence in the United States. So we have not had any idea of going to the US investors. And I don't think our investor would be interested in having US investors right now, until we are proven and on a track record.
And Niels, on that point, do you feel like the investor community you're working with has deep enough kind of pool of capital to finance you through to commercialization? And
so far we have a syndicate of 5 or 6 of investment fund and family funds and private investors, and they have deep pocket enough for put it on the market. If you need to heavily expansion, then we might need even more, but that's not a, but I think actually they do have enough money.
I can maybe continue.
Yeah.
So we have, as of now, raised $5.2 million, whereas 2.4 of those are non-dilutive grants. So we have had a heavily focus on applying for grants through the European Commission and also the Danish government as well. So we really feel that has validated our case, both from a sort of a non-dilutive perspective in terms of peer reviews and then also private investors. As of now, we have Danish angel investors and family funds and a small VC. We are looking to add at least international investors at our board or at the cap table, because I really think the experience and the outlook towards this is really something we need now, and also a validation of that we want the market. So now having a presence in the US, incorporated Radiobotics Inc., and also having the FDA clearance. Also, the question is, how committed are you to the US? And I really think the commitment comes also with having the investors. So we also just appointed a new chair of the board, Isa McCracken, which is also based in Houston. So that's a US chairwoman. And I think that those kind of things aligns with what we would like to do. So we're raising our growth round now, or /Series A, whatever you call it, is really for us to show that we want this. So ideally, I'd like to have my current investors to chip in, have a UK investor and a US investor to then have the international perspective. And that's how we see it now. I mean, when speaking to US investors, they are asking for different kinds of things. I mean, most of them said, come back when you have the FDA. So I've been very busy since Monday to reach out again, and I can understand that it's also showing that you're de-risking the case by actually being able to do these things. So I feel that the competition is higher when you go outside, at least coming from Denmark, and that is also a great thing to prove for your company, because you will need to live up to these standards, and you need to have your plans in place and do all of these things that US investors would very much be asking for. But I also think in return, you get much more expertise and much more those that have done this. Jonathan, when you're talking about, you've done this for so many years. I mean, there are not that many investors in Denmark that is specialized into this, that can have the same track record and have the same credentials as you would have. So I really think that is what we're looking for, is having the expertise and having sort of showing that we want to be committed to the US as well.
That's great. And Jonathan and Tim, what's your kind of sort of two different kind of perspectives here, I think, on the question of US investment. What's your kind of reaction to that? And in particular, what do you think? What are the kind of obstacles and or kind of roadblocks for a smaller startup in Denmark or Sweden to be able to attract the interest of US investors, provide what the US investors are looking for, and what steps should a company like that take? It sounds like a presence in the US, operational plans for the US are all part of that. Interested in hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, well, if I may, Jonathan.
No, I was actually saying, Tim, if you would go first, I have to lower my shade because the light is terrible in my eyes. So it's perfect.
But I think actually both Niels and Stine has some valid points here, because, and the point that Stine makes is something that probably every startup is getting a little bit sick and tired of hearing, but you want to go for the smart money. And if you want to accelerate into the US market, the smart money is the US investors. And because they can help you, right? It's not just a matter of putting money into the entity. It's a matter of helping you actually accelerate and get some return on that investment. So I think Stine has a point in having international investors is as good, valuable for you as it is to have a diverse board in your internationalization. And I think the point that Niels brings, that it's probably also probably a discussion you should have on the board level, is what do your existing investors think about you, just for example, setting up a US entity for US investors to pretty much buy their access into. You should have a very clear plan on who does what and what do you actually invest into. No, we have not seen any US investors wanting to invest in a Danish company. There needs to be a US entity, and the US operations is what they invest into.
But in terms of what you've seen with US investors' interest in Danish companies, is it, on the biotech side, right? Very, very early stages, completely the norm. What stage of development do you see the US investor community kind of beginning to pay attention to a Danish or other Nordic medtech?
For investors are the same, across the globe, really. They are looking at what benefit am I buying into and what risk do I take? So everybody, for example, having that FDA approval, in principle, that's a de-risk, right? You're investing into something that could actually go onto the market. Now the next step is finding out who will actually pay for it. But it's all about de-risking as much as possible, as early as possible, because that's what investors buy into. So it's very hard to have, when you're talking about seed and pre-seed, it's the angel investors, right? When you're looking for VC, de-risking is the name of the game, and FDA approval is one. Knowing your health economic assessment is another. So I would say it's when US investors start being interested in Danish companies, that's when you have the FDA approval and you have an assessment of, you have done your due diligence on reimbursement, for example.
Thank you.
Oh, John, I'll offer, maybe I have the luxury of going last year in this segment of the conversation, so I can try to consolidate some thoughts. One is to cite a couple of just basic mantras. One is that there's nothing more dilutive than undercapitalization. And I think there are a lot of dynamics that we can speak about in terms of the perception of American institutional venture capital versus European capital, the different terms that are used, preferences, board governance, et cetera, all of which can be real challenges on both sides with regard to attracting the capital that you would like. The other thing, and I say this as a partner in a venture fund, but I emphasize this, and I have for years, to companies. Venture is an asset class like anything else. And there's early stage venture, there's late stage venture, we're growth capital. And although we love to think of ourselves, and hopefully we are, as visionary and supportive of companies, and Stine, thank you for your kind words about expertise. But at the end of the day, we also have a lane in which we have to exist. We have promised our LPs, if they give us a pile of their money to invest wisely, that we're going to return a larger pile of their money to them. And therefore, we have to stick within parameters. And we are asset managers, despite the visionary reputation of venture capitalists. So I think in the pandemic, there have been a couple of interesting dynamics. The level of stage, number, valuation, amount of capital and cross-border capital that has gone on in Danish biotech and beyond is extraordinary for the last 18 to 20 months. And although health tech and med tech have risen extraordinarily as a class during the COVID era, and there's now, it's a 500 billion plus market, there's an enormous amount of venture, especially going into health tech. It doesn't translate into the same early stage risk-taking, risk transfer investment that biotech has experienced. So Tim, I agree with you directionally. I do think that there are a number now of VCs that are giving at least lip service to cross-border investment, because let's face it, there's also an arbitrage opportunity. The Nordics are capital efficient without question. The valuations and the drip feed of the capital in has made the rounds lower cost. So there's an intrinsic attraction to investing into Nordic companies. However, it's really hard to overcome logistics for American VCs. If you're sitting in Silicon Valley with 100 startups around you, flying to Copenhagen, although I fly to Copenhagen every 4 to 6 weeks happily, and I love every restaurant there, you're not going to do that from San Francisco or from Silicon Valley. So there's a logistical challenge to this. That said, and I think we are an example of that fund, as we've learned that we don't need to be as face-to-face, and as we've learned that there are opportunities that extend well beyond the corners that we can get to of our communities by cab or by Uber, I think there is increasing interest, even at the stage that is before the de-risking of reimbursement or of FDA approval. Niels Erik, in your setting, which as you know, obviously I know intimately, wound healing is a tougher circumstance because the buyers for that are fewer, and the IPO analogs really are revenue-driven analogs. That's maybe less true in some of the health tech and med tech circumstances. So I think, again, you match the asset to the capital available to you, and you may find those types of buyers. The mistake that I've seen Nordic companies make over and over again, especially in the med tech and health tech space, and this relates to Niels Erik's comment, or my comment to Niels Erik earlier about biology. Biology and wound healing in a DFU, whether it's Copenhagen or Stuttgart or Boston, is the same biology. However, integrating into a healthcare delivery system in Denmark with an information-based ICU knowledge algorithm, or with digitization and dissemination of imaging or AI in imaging, that is exceedingly different when you're dealing with the University of Copenhagen versus when you're dealing with the Houston Methodist Medical Center or Boston or California. So not having that preparation, not controlling that debate over exactly what your US entry is versus what you've achieved regionally in a very different healthcare and way less complex healthcare system, I think that's as much of the issue as it is whether you've hit a specific risk mitigating milestone, because there are early stage investors that, if your thesis is great, will love the risk benefit ratio. And there are those like us who really need to invest at those inflection points of commercialization and exit, where that knowledge becomes the driver as much as a specific milestone. So, John, I'll stop there, but those are my consolidated reactions to a lot of what has been said.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting, and I think I'd love to just touch a little bit more, Jonathan, we're talking about the roadblocks or the obstacles or what the speed bumps to getting U.S. venture and other investment into the Nordic companies here. Putting aside logistics, because I think that's something that everyone can kind of get their mind around. Can you talk a bit more about integrating, taking your medical technology and integrating that into the healthcare system that you're trying to commercialize into, and why the U.S. presents so many obstacles, and to the extent that I know you brought up health tech, to the extent that you see kind of other health tech companies that are actually trying to address exactly that point to some extent, in terms of facilitating or introducing technologies or products that make that more efficient. That would be interesting to hear about as well. But I think to understand that obstacle in particular would be very helpful.
Yeah, and I'll make this answer way more succinct because I think others, I'm sure, should have a chance to weigh in. I mean, simply put, from a med tech perspective, the hurdles in the United States that are so much more complex and difficult are, we still have, a multi-payer system, for example. We have still motivations that are across the board, although at the end of the day, quality of care really counts. So if you have a novel cardiologic device, but it's disruptive to practice as we know it, and it's not reimbursable as yet, or it's unproven, the long-term data aren't there, that's a huge hurdle. And although it may be easier in a smaller medical community, it's a lot tougher to get ultimately commercial traction or even regulatory traction, based on testing. From a health tech perspective, there are 4 basic electronic medical records in the United States in use across all of these integrated delivery systems, and we're increasingly a hub and spoke integrated delivery system type of network. You've got to be able to integrate with the way the technological backbone of those hub and spoke systems work for it to be proven to be qualitatively effective. So if you've got an ICU knowledge-based algorithm for delivering care or a communication system, it still has to work within the overall IT structure. And incidentally, that is a long sales cycle. So when you're talking about investing capital, you got to figure out how you're going to calculate that into your returns, which at the end of the day are what investors need to make sure they guarantee to their investors to be successful.
And maybe if I can add on some of the hurdles and then those things. I mean, we were part of Texas Medical Center's accelerator program last year, and obviously that answered a lot of the unknowns in terms of, is there a market fit? Is there a demand for what we do? How will you get it to the market? And then some of those things. So that is actually one of my recommendations. If you are at a stage where you're not necessarily sure of, you have something that is actually viable in the US, that there's a lot of help through that, but also through MedTech Bridge and those kind of initiatives can really support in that. That's the first thing. The other thing is that when you're building innovative technology, and I can only speak on behalf of the imaging space, is that there is not really a market yet. So one of the hurdles here is that we're trying to do this while we're also creating the market for it. And that gives a lot of unknowns in terms of integration and in terms of adaptation of these things, because how are we going to do this? And I still don't know if we will succeed, because I mean, we started doing our commercial efforts as of last Monday, but we obviously has been doing our groundwork, and hopefully we will sign our first client within the end of the month, so that we can actually prove that we can both install it and actually also generate some value. But that still remains a little bit unanswered, at least in the US. But I also think that being in this space, you have to acknowledge that this is how it's going, and you have to be comfortable in the unknown in some way, right? Because this is why we're all here. But then it is, find those that can support you in actually driving this and understanding the market. And as coming from Scandinavia, I really think it's difficult to understand the US health care system, because every state that I go to, even hospital system, their workflows are different, reimbursement processes are different, and all of these things. So it is such a struggle. My recommendation would be to start with one state and get hold of some of the things there, do your market research, and go from there. Because I mean, one state is even larger than the country of Denmark, right? So I mean, that's a big thing in itself.
And with Radiobotics, your approach was just you got a CE mark product already, right? In Europe, right? So
yes. So we started in Europe and we went through the process. It's my experience, at least when it comes to a health tech device, that it is actually easier to go through the European CE marking, because there are some processes that are a little bit more defined in terms of the FDA, where there's quite a few unknowns, and you would need to have a close contact with the FDA consultants. And there are fewer things that is actually laid out, and you have to do your pre-sub meetings to get answers, whereas those things doesn't exist in Europe, right? So it's a little bit different. You have just to fill out the protocol. The good thing is that we can reuse a lot from our CE marking for the FDA application as well. So it's a good amount of duplication that you can do, so you don't have to redo everything.
Right. No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And are you pursuing commercialization in Europe in parallel with the US, or are you prioritizing one or the other? And what markets in the US and in Europe? Sorry, the countries.
So I mean, really the way we have looked at it is that I believe that Scandinavia is a great place to do innovation. And that is also a little bit you alluded to, Jonathan. There's a lot of great things happening, getting access to the Danish healthcare system. We've been very privileged to get access to some really good health data through the Danish hospitals, of which we could develop our algorithms on. I mean, it's a 10-minute bicycle ride for the largest radiology department in Denmark. So we can easily go there and test. That's a huge privilege. And also the access to the talent through the Danish Technical University. So I really believe that Scandinavia is the place we develop and we build it. The commercialization is what we look at now is happening in the UK and the US. And that's for two reasons. It's because the NHS is struggling. They have admitted they're struggling, and they cannot educate the people that they need. So they will need new technology, and they're funding a lot of money into this. In the US, they're not necessarily the same need for people, but they're acknowledging the technology is going to be a huge differentiator in the future as well. So the adoption rate of new technology is much easier and much larger in the US as well. So that's why we have focused on these two markets, that there is a need and there is a sort of an openness to its new technology.
And just to talk, so in terms of on the continent of Europe, in the larger markets, is it a resistance to new technology? Is that the kind of legacy technology is already sort of deeply ingrained, or?
Well, I guess it's a little bit of everything, because we haven't proved it all. And also, as you said, Jonathan, that sometimes you need to have sort of the clinical evidence to prove what you're doing. And really, that is also what we're doing. And that's also what has been funded by the European Commission to do multi-center clinical trials across 3 countries in Europe to show really what we're doing, that works in a much larger setting and those. So we are working on those. But what I think in Europe is, and that it might be my perspective, is that we still have not come to the conclusion that we will run out of people very soon. We're very spoiled in Europe that we just want to educate more people. And that's really what we have seen. The UK have seen it before others. I think, at least, I mean, we have commercial deployments in Denmark, but I mean, that has taken so long because we really don't think we need new technology. And so we have just seen that the processes and the openness and the willingness to invest as well is much larger in the UK and US, because we have been investigating 2 things in our market research: is where do we solve the largest problems, and where's the willingness to pay, right? Those are the 2 things you will need to answer. And we have seen that in UK and US.
John, I'll just put on my honorary Dane hat for a moment. I want to echo, Stina's very clear comment about technology and innovation in Denmark, and Tim and Niels Erik, you have also been just at the forefront of this. It's an extremely, the Nordics and other parts of Europe, but I think the Nordics especially, is an incredibly exciting health tech and med tech emerging economy at this juncture. And I know even the Bioinnovation Institute in Copenhagen, one where we're deeply involved, both at Back Bay and BioVentures, is really promoting that and trying to extend from the biotech landfall, to health tech and med tech. So there's this wonderful opportunity to prove and maybe replicate in the European markets. There is greater resistance, there's greater cost consciousness, et cetera, and then translate with scalability to the US. That said, the caveat is that there are a whole host of ideas that actually seem innovative, but they're engineering solutions in search of problems. And there may be way too much capital chasing way too many ideas. And at the end of the day, it's the good idea with clinical impact and system impact, economic and quality impact, that are going to prevail. And I think those are the questions that, Stina, you articulated that you have to ask yourself proactively as a health tech or med tech company, as you contemplate both the financing vehicle, which is as strategic as the development and commercialization vehicles that you go to.
Niels and Tim, just to get your thoughts on some of the points that Stina was making. Tim, in case of your clients, or Niels, in terms of the companies that you've founded and led, how have you guys approached some of the same obstacles that Jonathan laid out? Is it through the kind of partnering with a hospital in the US, or that Stine pointed out, or other? What sort of Tim, in your case, since you're obviously talking to lots of clients, what's sort of the menu of options that you kind of lay out for them, or push them towards as they're looking to try to overcome some of these?
Yeah, the first thing we do is trying to inform about the complexity and sort of weed out the big questions, because the US medtech or healthcare system is hugely complex when you're coming from Denmark. Jonathan, you said there's a vast amount of payers, but there's even, you can multiply that by 100, then you have the amount of decision makers. And that sort of thing we just don't have in Denmark. It's what, there's a couple of people that make the decision whether you can enter the Danish market, and then you are there. Then it's your obligation to make yourself known, but still, that is not the case in the US. So we're trying to, the first thing, get through the thick forest of complexity to find out what is it actually you do, and where, and to whom is that of value. And we do that, and there are many ways to do that, through mentor networks or hospital systems that are able to answer the questions you have on what value, what difference do you actually make, because that's the whole question here. What sort of problem do you solve, and is it big enough for someone to care?
And can I just make a quick comment? Because I know that the complexity is very big, but it's not that you can't figure it out, because others has done it. So it should discourage you a little bit. It forces you to think very strategic. But I also think, And that is what I've seen. So we've been active in the US for 1.5 years now, and we are sort of targeting the radiology and the orthopedic space. And I start to see now that all of the activities and events that we participated in, all of the meetings we had, introductions, and all of the things, people start to know of us now. And I'm actually very surprised that I sense, I mean, Denmark is such a small country, everybody knows each other, but I have a sensation of now that we have reached through the network of 1.5 years hard work of connecting and being active in the US. So I'd also just say that I mean, that shouldn't be discourage you. It just gives you a little bit more work to do. But it can be done, and I'm very happy to see that pays off after intensive 1.5 years of really trying to be present. So it can be done, and you should do it if the US market is interesting, I would say.
But yeah, and case in point, I think you said you were sitting in Houston right now, right? So yeah.
I can add in on the. I think the U.S. system is complex, but I think Jonathan has advised when he did the 2 research for us that the market for Reaplex is in the U.S., and but the payment system, and we need to have both FDA approval and coverage decision from CMS. But it's still complex because now they have this insurance system. They have private insurance and then they take the coverage from CMS and they only select some product to be covered. So the US system is a complex system, but and I think we realize that we have a daughter company and we have a higher reimbursement consultant over there for years to figure it out. But I think it's a complex system out there.
Sure. Jonathan, putting on your investor hat or which probably is always on, but
it's the same hat.
Yeah, the same hat, exactly. I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of, and we've been talking a lot about kind of big picture things here, but homing in on the last 18 months, your thought, and you made an allusion to the kind of flow of investment into health tech in particular, but medtech broadly in the Nordic countries and elsewhere. What is you think for US VC investors, what's the current kind of zeitgeist or outlook in terms of kind of the investment thesis, the exit opportunities here? Are people excited about kind of the M&A potential for some of these companies, or is it IPO exits, and to what extent have you seen the SPAC boom that's enveloped the United States over the past 18 months? Touch on this with European medtech generally, but obviously Nordic is the focus here. But
sure.
Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, let me talk to the 3 exit scenarios, and I'll put in a bold-faced commercial for Back Bay, and that there's actually an entire webinar on SPACs that my colleagues who run our investment banking division have, and it's available on the website, because that's a very interesting, albeit, and John, you know this, it's not like SPACs were invented 18 months ago. They've been around for decades.
Right.
But suddenly the infusion of capital is sort of insane. So there are 3 dynamics to medtech exits that I think are informative. Acquisition is always, and I think for an investor or for companies we counsel, that's what you should assume. That's the default. That big companies, and there are myriad now big companies, including large private equity groups that are aggregating medtech and health tech plays, albeit revenue and EBITDA driven. But there's a sudden larger community of potential acquirers across medtech and health tech. That's a very positive thing. There's increasing diversification among these, and there are also mid caps that are highly acquisitive that are quite well capitalized. So assume that M&A is the default exit. And to build to that, I always say that, characterize medtech as either exceedingly disruptive, but sufficiently promising that you can get picked up as a technology basis. That's a rare event, and more likely that you are truly differentiated, you're predicated on existing principles, but you'll be able to actually demonstrate commercial traction. And that's the bulk of M&A exits. It's really those 2 things. And if you're a smaller incremental addition to the system, you might get acquired, but that's not a venture capital play in terms of what types of investors you're looking for. For the last couple of years, John, there's been a more robust medtech market and persistent medtech IPO market that I've seen in my 2 decades of being on the clinical delivery side of this whole equation. And they are, for the most part, still revenue-driven companies. They may not have achieved profitability. There's usually diversity. Doesn't have to be, but the markets have to be large enough and growth has to be substantial enough. And the technology differentiation and commercial solutions that needed to be worked out have to be there to really qualify not only as an IPO candidate, but more importantly, people never, I don't think about this enough. It's not the IPO that's the exit. It's a financing event. You've got to have research coverage. You've got to have support. You have to have continued news flow. You've got to have trading liquidity. So all of those things have to be in place for an IPO-able company to really exist. To touch very briefly on SPACs, SPACs are really a backdoor, as we all know, to the public market. The principles I just invoked for a public company going a traditional IPO route are the exact same thing for a SPAC. If you don't have sponsorship, if you don't have trajectory, milestones, news flow, research, you're going to end up being a failed reverse merged or SPACed company, and that doesn't do you any good. So I think the exit opportunities for medtech and health tech, Europe or the United States, are greater than they've been in a very long time because of the acceleration of capital and the amount of capital coming in. But that doesn't mean that you should deviate from the standards of behavior and company building that have always been in place, because it'll just mean you go out at a high valuation and you come back at a low valuation, and that's not in anyone's interest.
Mm-hmm. And I think that I'll maybe take that as a helpful segue for one thing that has come up a lot in my practice, which is for European companies, what's the value of doing if they're going to go the IPO route, if they're at a point where they can, or that's a possibility, right? What's the value and advantages of doing a European, kind of local IPO, whether that's Nasdaq, Stockholm, Copenhagen, Euronext, versus trying to go straight to Nasdaq, straight to the US. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Jonathan. I mean, I've seen it work out kind of both positively and negatively, right? I've seen some successful Euronext ones where then they've been able to come over to Nasdaq and valuation hasn't been too big of a problem. I've also seen companies that sort of get stuck in a cul-de-sac, right, in a small market with a ton of retail investors and valuation that they can't really support potentially the U.S. investment community, and it makes it tough for them to take the next step. But if you have any reaction to that.
Quickly, and then I don't want to take up any more airtime because there's a lot of good thoughts around the table.
Yeah.
So I think of the European markets as transitional financing markets predominantly, although they can certainly grow into significant valuation and therefore exitability, liquidity, trading dynamics, etc. But it's a great way as an intermediary step potentially to get finance, to get what you need to prove the value that allows you to then transition into a U.S. commercial entity, an M&A target, or a U.S. public entity. And I think it can serve all those purposes. There's nothing wrong with taking the intermediary step of a European market. There's nothing wrong with that being your final pathway if it turns out to work out well for you.
That's great. I think that's helpful. And just to open up real quickly, if anyone has thoughts on that, Steen, I know obviously you've been involved with a number of companies. When you look at the public capital markets, both in Europe and US, and Niels, same for you, and Tim with your clients. Do you guys have a kind of an outlook on that, and how you think about the direction you would?
I mean, when you build a company, and speaking to investors, and you try to formalize the board, you sort of always being asked, what is your exit strategy, right? And that is really where you sort of look towards IPO, or you see of other kinds of what is happening in the industry, and is the consolidation also happening at some point. And for Radiobotics, it's a little too early to say where we would like to take this. But I mean, we are closely monitoring what is happening, and there is a lot of interesting things happening in the imaging space as of now, in both in acquisition and sort of the larger imaging or implant companies is doing a lot of interesting things as well. So, I mean, my recommendation to this is really, I'm afraid to take decisions too early, but then at least keep an eye on a lot of what is going on in the market as well. So I really think that there was a question from the audience around how do you decide on the market, and where do you recommend to start? And I can just quickly share my thoughts on the question from Johan around how did we do it. So actually we did three things. I mean, we went to Boston to see how does health tech technology, what we're doing, fit in, and then Jonathan, you can probably confirm that that's a lot of bioscience, and there's a whole community around that. We went to Minneapolis And there's a great community there with the Medical Alley and the work you're doing, Tim, and your colleagues as well. And that is, and for us, there's also a lot of orthopedics and imaging companies there as well. And then we went to Texas to check out the whole Texas Medical Center. And because we got accepted to the program at TMC, that was really what made our decision of going to Texas first. I mean, the TMC in itself is the world's largest medical center. So there's a huge opportunity there. It's also equally difficult to get in there because of the size. So I really think you have to assess in terms of what is the technology, where the cluster of your customers and who you're going to sell to. And really, we were looking at Boston, Minneapolis, and Texas or Minnesota for us, as well as the 3 states. And so yeah, I mean, it's not easy, but you have to, I would say you have to choose one, but it's also easy to move to another area if you're not successful there. I guess you can share also, Tim.
Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, I'm afraid the answer will be the consultant's answer, because it depends. Right? It depends what your product you're doing, where you want to land in the US.
Yeah.
So it all depends on which ecosystem do you fit best. That's what's going to help you. That's the ecosystem and the companies and the network that is already there. So I'm afraid that depends.
Yeah. Well,
having champions and the right committee behind you will be as important as anything. And you can be in a smaller setting and prove yourself terrifically with the right support versus going for the big prize. I agree fully with both of you.
We had one other question from the audience here that I think we probably have time to address, which is, from an investment perspective, are there any common red flags when looking at European med techs? And it's a pretty broad question, but I think Jonathan, you touched on a few of them before, valuation issues, and I think Niels, you have as well, dilution. But from the investor perspective, what would be the things that you would jump out at you as things you don't like to see, I suppose?
So, John, if you want me to start from the U.S. investor perspective, I guess that's the hat I have on at the moment. Yes, so, at least for this question, so there are a couple of things. I was speaking at the NOAM meeting, which is where I was given this cup 2 years ago, right before the pandemic, and somebody asked me the question at the end of my talk. I was lucky enough to give the keynote address. What about Janteloven and the Danish CEO versus the US CEO, and I apologize, my Danish with as much time as I spend there is horrendous. But the issue is, management teams in Europe and in the Nordics especially have a really different persona than US management teams, which tend to be, forgive me, swashbuckling, self-promotional, and the Nordic sensibility, which frankly I'm a huge fan of, is just different. There's a more intrinsic humility, efficiency, et cetera, that goes along with it. I think that it's not a red flag, but it's a caveat that in dealing with US investors as a Nordic company, there will be some that don't get your style. And what I would say is, if they don't get your style, don't change your style to suit them. Find those that do get your style, because it is a different approach to self-presentation. It's not a different approach to excellence whatsoever. And I think that's important. Board composition, previous round structure, and willingness to understand the need for specific US venture-like structures and governance issues are some of the major impediments to get over early. And I would counsel all CEOs to speak with their board early about how to make that transition to a US-based institutional investor. And then the other is the management teams that come in, and I said this earlier, with a regional perspective, with wonderful proof of concept in a regional way, of the technology, of its utility, et cetera, who haven't at least really thought through the US market penetration, the US regulatory penetration, how it translates, and the complexity we've all been talking about. Those are where, and I've counseled a lot of companies with both hats on, saying, go back and at least know the answers to these questions, even if you don't have the capital yet to implement, and then come back, and then you can find a partner in a US investor that says, I love this is ready now, or I love this, it's going to be ready a year from now. Let me give you all of my guidance and counsel so that you can get to the point where this is investable based on our criteria. Those are the things that I think about.
And maybe Niels or Steen, jumping to the other side. I mean, when you've dealt with investors what you know, what has been most exciting to them, and what have been kind of the biggest challenges you've had to face when you know, presenting your company and your board and your cap structure and your technology to them?
So I can at least share what I mean, we're speaking to quite a few US investors, and I have a investor here at TMC in an hour, and the predominant question they have is when you're going to relocate. And I mean, I'm a little challenged by the visa paperwork and those kind of things. It's not really progressing very well at the moment, but relocation, and, you know, will you eventually flip your company to the US? And then obviously the clearances that you need. Now we overcome the first thing, and now I have to figure out the other things. But I see a different kind of challenges and questions, and there's also cultural differences, right? In terms of, you know, how do you understand where you come from? Being a Scandinavian company where you had never really dealt with invoices in the healthcare system is very different. And you try to speak into value-based healthcare, and all you met with is, can I make more money or save money on what you do? So I think there are a lot of different things, but you also have to be ready to sort of do the transition and change your perspectives, and because otherwise you will not be fitted for the US market. So I very much respect the different kind of ways and dynamics that's happening across the Atlantic, so to say. But I really see the, you know, you want to relocate, you know, how are you going to conquer the markets, and obviously also what are the regulatory pathways that you believe you can I would say succeed with, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Jonathan, I saw you just made a good point in on chat here, right? That you know, some venture funds are unable to invest in foreign entities, right? So that also can lead to redomiciling. We've seen that.
And then you can figure out really fast, right? I mean, you can ask those questions up front, saying, you know, is it a Danish entity is going to be a showstopper? And then if you don't want to flip, you can do that. I mean, the discussions we've had with some is that the first investment in a Danish entity is fine, but then they would like to see how will we then do it in the future when raising more money? Because if you're raising a substantial amount of money from US investors, you probably have to have some sort of IP flipped to the US. So I also think if they are willing to do the first part, but we'll see a plan, that can at least help for some smaller investors, I would say up to $10 million or something like that. Yeah.
And looking down the road, and Jonathan's talked a number of times about standard VC governance and board structures and kind of everything that the NVCA standard documents provide. All of that is often easier if you're just operating under Delaware law, right? And the US entity. We've you know, local law, and obviously there's just a plug for, you know, some great Danish and Swedish lawyers that we've worked with. If anyone wants a recommendation, let me know, because we've had some great experiences. But local law can occasionally be an issue. We've seen it with you know, discounts on financing rounds and the like, where you know, your Danish and Swedish law can be less flexible than the US. We're coming up, believe it or not, on 2 minutes to go here, a minute and a half to go. So Josh just appeared back. So I think we've run through the questions that we've gotten from the audience, which is great. I was hoping to do a really brief, you know, give people a chance to kind of look forward into the next year here. There's a ton of macro uncertainty, but obviously sounds like a lot of positive dynamism and optimism about this space and about the community here. So I'm not sure that we're going to have the time to do that, but it looks like we're concluding here. So I think, unfortunately, we may have to cut it off, hopefully on an upbeat note. This has been a really interesting discussion. I really have a number of things I could keep going on, but it was great to meet all of you and to be able to share the hour with you, and a few really good questions from the audience, which was great as well. And with that, I think we can wrap it up. And thanks again to the four of you, and Josh, thanks for providing the forum. And we definitely look forward to in-person you know, meetings and a chance to go back to Europe, where I haven't been in 18 months, which is sort of depressing personally as well, but as soon as possible.
I think we all echo that.
Yeah.
Go on, Jonathan. Oh, okay, yeah. No, well, yeah, a huge thank you to all of our panel today, to Niels Erik, to Tim, to Stina, to John, and to Jonathan. Both John and Jonathan with Mints and Back Bay being two of our biggest supporters and partners. So a huge thank you to them for making the event happen. We'll also reiterate that we're hugely excited to be getting back to physical when we can. And for those who have missed it, we are very excited to be moving to Copenhagen with the LSX Nordic Congress for next year. So wait for us for some dates on that. We'll be, again, I've not traveled outside of the UK in the last 18 months, let alone to Europe from the US. So very excited to come over in about a month's time and start building that. We also have a number of events in London, which will be taking place physically towards the end of this year and early next. So I'm looking forward to seeing everyone in person. A huge thank you to the panel today for sharing their expertise and their insights with you all. We do have some sort of informal breakout sessions now that are taking place for anyone who wants to maybe make some serendipitous connections. There's 3 sort of breakout rooms, tracks for making some connections across biotech, health tech, or med tech. So if anyone wants to keep on the conversation, please do join those. That's actually the end. As I said at the beginning of this, it seems to have gone so quickly. These virtual events used to feel like they lasted forever, and this one's gone through very quickly. So much great insight from all of our speakers. So a huge thank you to everyone who's contributed across the speaker sessions. A huge thank you to all of our partners for making the event possible. The event's not over. All the sessions are now immediately available on demand. So if you've missed anything, you can go back and rewatch it all. I'd encourage you to also view the company showcases for the companies who are presenting their technology or their investment opportunity, and continue to engage on the platform. It'll still be open this week and the whole of next week as well, to make some new connections and have meetings and video meetings through the platform. Yeah, that's it from me now. Thank you all for joining us for the Nordic Congress in 2021, and we're unbelievably excited to be welcoming you back to Copenhagen in 2022. So hopefully see you all then.